Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 99 du Comité permanent des comptes publics de la Chambre des communes. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Application. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Puis conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité.
And in keeping in with Standing Order 109 of the vote, number 1, ArriveCan sent to the committee.
Welcome our witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Andrew Hayes, Sami Hanoush, good to see you again, all who were here yesterday, as well as Lucy Després, Director, hello, and from the Canada Border Services Agency, Aaron O'Gorman, President, good day, and Darryl Vleeming, Vice President and Chief Information Officer. I feel like the committee size has grown here.
A point of clarification, Chair?
Yes.
I would like to ask you, and perhaps the clerk as well, I understand that officials from PSPC and PHAC were originally invited and then unilaterally, by your choice, Chair, were removed from the witness list, even though the officials were ready and able to come today. So I would like to understand why, and then hopefully regain the floor so that we could discuss this matter.
Sure. So in light of the seriousness of the findings tabled by the Office of the Auditor General on Monday, that ArriveCan appears to have broken every rule in the book, and that the Auditor General called it the worst record-keeping she has witnessed. I acted on my own to hear directly from one department today, CBSA, along with the Auditor General's office, to get answers to our questions. And as you can see from the seats around this room, there's going to be no shortages of questions directed at both the OAG and CBSA. And I can assure members that we will hear from the other two departments in due course. Is this a point of order, Ms.
Yes, Chair, it is a point of order. The point of order here, Chair, is that we've had these discussions so many times that you acting unilaterally really puts the whole committee at a disadvantage. We had officials that were ready to be here today. You're absolutely right. This report is important for us to discuss. We had officials ready to be here. Members are here and willing and able to ask them the questions that is necessary. And you taking these unilateral decisions, Chair, really undermines the work of this committee. Public Accounts is a very important committee. It is a non-partisan committee or a multi-partisan one where we all get together and we have these important discussions.
Well, point of order, Chair.
We have been here trying to build consensus, trying to make sure that all members of this committee have a say in how we move forward on this. We have been nothing but compliant with the will of this committee, and I am just flabbergasted, Chair. And not only that, but now we're seeing a committee meeting scheduled during our constituency week. I do not agree with that at all, Chair. We had witnesses that were willing and able to come here today to answer the questions, and yet now we are looking at not only wasting their time
Point of order,
and
Chair.
rescheduling them unilaterally by you, Chair, but now we're having to rearrange our own schedules to come in during a constituency week so that we can hear from these officials that were ready and prepared to come.
So,
today, Chair.
Ms. Glid,
I really don't
beginning to
understand
repeat
this, Chair,
yourself.
and I absolutely disagree with this.
Okay, and you're entitled to disagree. As I have said before, this is an oversight committee, and I will do my best to guide it in a way that I think is best to get the answers this committee deserves. Members do have. Pardon me, Ms. Cleed, you had the floor. I heard you. You repeated yourself. I'd like you to hear my answer. That was not technically a point of order. I am happy to hear it. We're dealing with this meeting in front of us today. Members do have recourse should they disagree with my decisions. I would like to move to hear from the opening statements from Ms. Hogan as well as Ms. O'Gorman, and I'm going to propose a move in that direction. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for your opening comments, please.
Mr. Chair,
I am pleased to be here today to discuss our audit report on the ArriveCan application, which was tabled in the House of Commons yesterday. I wish to acknowledge that the lands on which we are gathered are part of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Our audit on the ArriveCan application looked at how the Canada Border Services Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and Public Services and Procurement Canada managed the procurement and development of the application, and whether they spent public funds in a way that delivered value for money. I will discuss our findings, but first, I have to say that I am deeply concerned by what this audit didn't find. We didn't find records to accurately show how much was spent on what, who did the work, or how and why contracting decisions were made. And that paper trail should have existed. Overall, this audit shows a glaring disregard for basic management and contracting practices throughout ArriveCan's development and implementation. Si les organisations gouvernementales
Government operations need to be flexible and fast in responding to COVID-19 pandemic, but they still needed to document their decisions and demonstrate the prudent use of public funds. In our audit, we found disappointing failures and omissions everywhere we looked. Most concerning was that the Canada Border Services Agency, PBSA, did not have complete and accurate financial records. Because of this, we were unable to calculate the exact cost of the ArriveCan application. By piecing together the information that was available, we estimated that ArriveCan costs were approximately $59.5 million. There was confusion right from the start. From April 2020 to July 2021, we found that the Public Health Agency of Canada and the CBSA did not work together to establish each agency's responsibilities for ArriveCan. And this accountability void, neither organization developed or implemented good policy or program management practices, such as developing objectives, goals, and cost estimates. In our examination of contracting practices, we saw little documentation to support how and why the Canadian Border Services Agency initially awarded the contract through a non-competitive process awarded to GS Strategies. Only one potential contractor submitted a proposal, and that proposal did not come from GC Strategies.
was involved in the development of requirements that were used when the agency later moved to a competitive process to award a $25 million contract for work on the ArriveCan app. The requirements were very specific and narrow. This gave GC Strategies an advantage that other potential bidders did not have. We also found that the Canada Border Services Agency's overall management of contracts was very poor. Essential information was missing from awarded contracts, such as clear deliverables and the qualifications required of workers. When we looked at invoices approved by the agency, details about the work performed and who did the work were often missing. This greatly contributed to our conclusion that the best value for money was not achieved. Finalement, nous n'avons trouvé aucune preuve pour indiquer que les
And finally, we received no concrete information. These led to private activities for the use of entrepreneurs. This is required by the Code of Ethics of the House. This lack led to a misunderstanding or of partiality or perception of privilege in extending the contract. We should always be careful to ensure that we are managing public funds adequately. An emergency does not mean that all the rules can go out the window and that departments and agencies are no longer required to document their decisions and keep complete and accurate records. As I stated just a bit earlier, I believe that this audit of ArriveCan shows a flagrant disregard for basic management practices. As a result, many questions that parliamentarians and Canadians are asking are still without answer. The lack of information to support ArriveCan spending and decisions has compromised their accountability. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Merci, bon après-midi. I first want to thank the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombuds for their work. Their reports have pointed to significant gaps in procurement processes, roles, and controls at the Canada Border Services Agency. I do not disagree with the term glaring. Their recommendations will serve as guideposts to addressing them. CBSA's management response to both of these reports reflects the work that we have already done and we will be doing to make sure that all of our procurement actions are aligned with policies and processes, that CBSA operates transparently and with regard for probity and value for money, and that all employees operate in a manner consistent with the CBSA's Code of Conduct and public service values and ethics. You have our plan, but permit me to highlight 3 actions that I believe will have a material impact. We have already created an Executive Procurement Review Committee to approve contracts and task authorizations. This is providing even more oversight on contracting activities. We will require employees to disclose interactions with potential vendors. Nous avons renforcé la capacité.
We have increased the capacity of our procurement group both to oversee all procurement activities and establish a center of expertise to help employees if they have questions or if they don't understand their authorities and obligations.
So actively improving our internal management practices more broadly. Following Treasury Board policies is cornerstone to effective public administration. And effective public administration is critical to maintaining the trust of Canadians. I hesitate to say the following because it might sound like an excuse, and it's not. The ArriveCan app was built during an extraordinary time and on an emergency basis. I know the CBSA was working as quickly as possible at the request of the Public Health Agency to replace a paper-based process that was not meeting their needs and was clogging the border. And having been at the Treasury Board Secretariat at that time, I know the direction was for departments to take action and, if needed, move front-end controls to the back to be biased in favor of action. But this same direction also stressed the requirement that exigent decisions and actions be documented. As the Auditor General and I have each discovered, this direction was not followed. The absence of documentation is what is giving rise to these serious questions. Without a doubt, people were moving fast. But that doesn't justify cutting and pasting contracted resources experience directly from statements of work or collaborating with a company on a document they will eventually build on. Je tiens à vous assurer que je fais tout ce que...
I want to assure you that I'm doing everything I can to get a clear picture of how all of this unfolded. But I'm also looking to the future.
21 report recognized that the manual process had limitations and was not giving public health the access to the information it needed when it needed it. The Auditor General found that the government improved the quality of information it collected and how quickly it was collected using the app. But as I have said, it's not okay that decisions were not documented, that procurement files were incomplete, and that proper processes were not followed. This audit points to significant gaps, and I do not put that at the feet of the pandemic. Nous avons donc beaucoup de faire, mais
We have yet a lot to do, but our team is composed of very dedicated and loyal employees. We are united in improving our processes and to maintain the confidence of Canadians, all the while offering and fulfilling our mandate. Thank you. we thank you as well.
The floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome back, witnesses. A.G. Hogan, quick question. The procurement ombudsman in his report had commented about the bait and switch that was happening with procurement and seemed to insinuate it was quite widespread through the whole of government. Do you have a sense of how systemic this issue is? Obviously, CBSA, but do you have a sense how systemic it is otherwise?
So it's my understanding that the procurement ombuds report really looked at the front end of the processes more, whereas when we audit, we come in once the procurement is in place and we're looking at sort of validating that the resources are used. So I could tell you here that there are reasons why a resource in a task authorization or a contract may not work on a contract, but I would expect that the mechanisms that the government has are used to switch that up so that you don't to accept an invoice with a resource that you didn't already vet.
The documents, we heard from both of you, missing documents, like who within CBSA was responsible for collecting and storing those documents? Like what documents, who is responsible for it?
I think where we saw missing elements, and I would encourage you perhaps to ask the president exactly who, but I would have expected that there would have been someone who would have planned a project oversight. And so that would have been perhaps the business owner, whoever was tasked with making sure that the application was developed and implemented. I would then expect someone in contracting to ensure that the file makes sense. Anyone who signs off on an invoice
but it was
for making sure.
Quite widespread, though.
Well, I think that there are many individuals who play a critical role when it comes to making sure procurement and projects are well documented.
Is it the same issue with the, you commented, inaccurate financial records? Is it the same issue throughout the department? Like it's just not one position, but throughout this project or throughout the department?
Well, again, I think it starts with the person who might accept an invoice with insufficient information and then certify and sign off that the government received what they should have received. Whoever does the coding, then who does the entry into the financial system. So again, I think you have the luxury of having the president of CBSA here, and some of these questions are well directed at her as to who would have been accountable and how many individuals would be involved in a process to treat an invoice.
Well, President O'Gorman, maybe you can answer that in writing because we're short of time, but maybe you can get back to the committee on that because I want to move on to another.
Could you just be clear on what the question is?
The question, what positions were responsible or should have been collecting and ensuring all the paperwork was there, but also as the AG comments, the inaccurate financial records, because I assume it's not just one person. Maybe we can get back to the committee of which departments, which projects, et cetera. Quick question
Just
for
one
you.
second. Is that possible for you to do that in writing after the?
I can answer it or come back and write
Yeah,
it.
in writing, please, just because it's shorter time.
Thank you.
I want to follow up just the two gentlemen, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, they both received performance bonuses last year, did they not? And the year before and the year before that?
I don't know.
They did. I'm telling you, I'm surprised that you would not know, considering the
I
gravity
wasn't-
of the situation.
I
I'm
wasn't
stunned. That's not part of the look. How did they receive bonuses if they are the subject of these accusations?
So I wasn't aware who received bonuses, but to your question, they would have been assessed at the end of the fiscal year. And
So-
to the extent that
So
there's
one moment
information,
they're assessed well enough to receive bonus. The next moment they're history's greatest monsters in CBSA, according to some of these documents. It just seems quite strange.
But I can answer that question, Mr. Chair.
Just
if-
very briefly, please.
So there's mechanisms, if there's information that comes to light after performance ratings are done, to be able to reconsider those ratings.
Just a question for you. Operations Estimates first started this ArriveCan investigation October 2022. Why did it take all the way up to the Bottler allegations for CBSA to actually act and start looking more seriously at this rather lackadaisical effort?
So two things. One, when the study was started and we were bringing information together to respond to the committee, it was clear to me that the documentation was incomplete and inadequate. The study was started in October, and the Bottler allegations came in November the following month.
Last one, I want to read to you a text. This is from Mr. Dewan, and this is before his appearance. My issue is what I want to say and what I can't say. Can I throw PHAC under the bus? Throw ministers under the bus? What do you think Mr. Dewan was referencing when he said he could not speak to these for fear of throwing PHAC or ministers under the bus?
I have no idea.
Have you looked into it?
This is the first I hear of that text.
Have you ever heard of any issues regarding Mr. Dewan and such issues in his prep for appearing before committee?
No.
How far back, I guess, does this mess with CBSA go with its purchasing and its IT issues? This is not something that started with ArriveCan. How long has it been going on, and how did no one catch it?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. So as I said, when I started and there were questions regarding the documentation and the cost of ArriveCan, it became very clear to me that the documents were not complete, and we had to try and piece together the information as the questions came in. I'm not sure how far back it goes. I've also launched an internal audit that will give me some further information, and certainly the procurement ombuds and the Auditor General have shed more light on the issue. But the systems and processes were not in place, and suggestion to me is that some of that does predate the pandemic.
Thank
and
you.
was maybe
That's the time, Mr.
exacerbated
McCauley.
by the pandemic.
Thank you. That's the time. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor now for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to put on the record that indeed I had questions prepared for all the witnesses that we were expecting today, because this is the job of this committee, the Public Accounts Committee, unlike government operations or ethics or other committees that you'll find here on the Hill. Our job is to question the deputy ministers and the executive directors of the public servants, if you will, of all departments that are reviewed by the Auditor General. And Auditor General, I want to thank you for the work that you and your team have done in providing this report to this committee, to Parliament, and to Canadians. Canadians have every reason to be proud of the professionalism and the impartiality that your team brings to the work that you do. I, for one, I'm a longstanding member of the Public Accounts Committee, and from time to time, we need to remind Canadians about the importance of our work here being impartial, and in fact, that one should not be able to tell. I think it was a former NDP member who said one should not be able to tell which party a questioner comes from when they are questioning. Because yes, I am shocked, I am outraged by the findings in this report, as are my colleagues. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that during a time, a once in a lifetime, once in a century pandemic, that at a time when the public service was pulling together all stops to help Canadians, to bring forward the life-saving vaccines, to provide necessary supports, to work in what was an environment where there were many unknowns, that some individuals, some public servants, it appears, and it's not my place here to name them, that investigation, that work will be done elsewhere as is appropriate, decided, as the Auditor General said yesterday, to throw out the most basic financial management rules out the window. And yet we know that from just human nature that these things can happen, which is why we have measures in place, checks and balances, oversight measures, in order to find out what is going on. Now, Auditor General, I did want to ask you, first of all, this is not the first time you're looking at ArriveCan. Please briefly summarize the findings of the first report that you had. on this?
So this is the first time that I look at the development and implementation of the ArriveCan application itself. We did audit the use of ArriveCan in 2021 when we were looking at border measures. We completed 2 audits in 2021 around border measures, and the second one noted that ArriveCan contributed to an improved response by the government at the border. So it improved the quality of the information, the contact information collected from travelers, and the timeliness of that information. So beforehand, the paper-based system at times took something like 28 days for the public health agency to receive contact information from an individual who should have been quarantining. And it's not worth very much when you're trying to see if they quarantined for 14 days and you only receive the information after 28 days. So we did highlight there that it improved the measures at the border, but did not actually look at the application until we issued this report yesterday.
Thank you very much for that, because I agree with those findings. I also agree with the findings in their entirety of this ArriveCan report that you tabled yesterday. The application, it was needed, but it cost too much. And so I'd like to ask you, Auditor General, have you spoken to this committee before about how you choose to audit departments and how you come to do the work that you do? Could you just tell us how long have you been working on this audit?
We received a motion from the House of Commons back in November. I'm just going to double check to get the right date. On November 2nd, 2022, that asked us to complete work on the ArriveCan application. Well, it's important for the independence of my office for me to be able to choose who we audit, what we audit, and when we audit it. I also take very seriously requests that come from the House of Commons or the Senate. And in this case, we decided that it was an important audit to carry out. We intended to release it before the holidays, so at the end of 2023, but had to extend some of the time needed in order to finalize the work and tabled it yesterday.
Thank you, Auditor General. And indeed, you were working on different aspects of this study, were you not? Because our committee did ask you to continue your work on ArriveCan. There was a letter on record. Perhaps the clerk can provide it for members who don't recall back in October. I'm just trying to make the point that the independence of your office is critical, but I understand that you do respond to the concerns of parliamentarians, and we greatly appreciate the fact that you do so.
Shannon, you have time for a very brief question, if you may.
So, Ms. O'Gorman, I just want to hear from you, and thank you for your remarks. Can you please explain to us, as the Auditor General points out in paragraph 1.40, that there was a lack of sound justification for the selection of the GC strategies? Where was the gap in the chain of command? Why was this not uncovered sooner?
So I'll tell you that we have also been looking to answer that. So to the extent that I knew there was a gap, I was open to the Auditor General perhaps finding the answer. We have an internal investigation going on. So as I said, the documentation was not good, and the inability to answer the question as to who picked that company has been hanging over the agency for over a year now. What we do know is who signed the documents, who signed the requisition form to PSPC asking that a contract be put in place, and that individuals exercise their authorities, significant authorities vested in the FAA in their Section 32 and Section 34 attestations. So there's been testimony that there was pressure and other people took decisions. Open to having that play out. Have not seen any evidence to that. So all we have to go on right now is the paper.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Desgagné. Vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Gagné, you have 6 minutes. Welcome all, and thank you for being here. Madam Auditor General, I have a question for you. I asked you some questions yesterday. I hope we get answers today. The information that we got from PSPC as to the overuse of non-concurrential sole supplier provisions. Do you have any more information on the nature of the warnings they've received, and where did the communication happen? Well, if I understood your question, when Public Sector Procurement Canada received a request, this was done by email in May 2020, where an official in their manager's group but they copied in CC the executive director at the time to the management, Mr. Yukanadon, CC'd the message, was CC'd in the message. So he was, who was the principal recipient of this email? Well, the individuals who were going to implement or activate the contracts. Are they still in the job today? Have you been able to ask them a few questions? No, they're no longer employed by the agency. Have they been transferred to other agencies? Are they still working in the public service? I'm afraid I don't know that. So you didn't inquire as to why the recommendations were not followed, because the recommendations include by PSPC were not followed, but do you have any idea what the rationale is for not following those recommendations? No, we have no justification for the decision taken or not taken in this case from PSPC. But we did interview the employees, who are no longer employees, by the way, and we didn't get any satisfaction. Well, as of 2018 onwards, Mr. Sebourin, who was working at the CBSA, a whistleblower, if you will, we wanted to protect him, and since 2018, Mr. Sebourin has noted that there were quite reprehensible acts being conducted there at CBSA. Other departments of the government were mentioned. There were other activities or processes that were not being followed. So 2018, a whistleblower, and this individual had foul things put into his coffee. He had to take sick leave. He'd been intimidated, bullied, and it's been going on for a number of years. Ms. Gorman, I think you've been in your position since July 2022, over a year ago. Did you not receive a clear mandate from the government to clean up the mess in this department? Well, I don't need a mandate to put things in order, but it's quite clear that there are two ministers to whom I report. I'll switch to English.
Clear that if there is wrongdoing, it needs to be found out.
D'accord. Mais
And if there
avez-vous eu
are
des
problems
discussions?
with the systems and processes.
Avez-vous eu des discussions?
Have you had discussions on those issues with the two ministers that you just referred to? The ministers did have questions as to the management on procurement. When was this?
When these allegations came up, I informed him that the allegations were serious. We were taking them seriously, and I was also making moves on internal processes to shore up information and systems and processes problems I was already seeing. In my initial brief with the minister in the summer when he was appointed, and I did my survol de toutes les choses avec qui nous sommes préoccupés.
I conducted the overview. I raised the issues.
Systems and processes and contracting issues in the
D'accord.
agency very clearly.
Quelles consignes avez-vous reçues par rapport à mettre de l'ordre dans vos... Est-ce que...
And what feedback did you get on that about getting putting things in order, did they identify, did you suspend anyone or, well, we know that the two employees are no longer employees. So, but it seems to be more generalized within the agency. Were other people laid off or dismissed? I'd like to have some concrete examples.
That this was my priority, and on the question of harassment, I take that very seriously, and in that, any intimidation. So our systems and processes need to have the confidence of our employees.
J'ai plus beaucoup de temps, mais est-ce que des personnes ont été mises à pied?
Were individuals suspended, laid off, fired? What did you do concretely?
You're referring to, but we have taken action on founded allegations, and we have taken disciplinary action, but I'm not going to speak to specific actions and specific individuals.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Suivant, c'est...
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I too want to thank the Auditor General and her team for a very important audit, and of course the audit's role in what is hopefully a process to make things much better, because this, in my opinion, is one of, if not the worst audit I have ever seen ever. Maybe even hopefully not in continuity, but hopefully we can level how serious this is with you and members of the CBSA, that this is simply unacceptable. It must change. And this audit, I really do hope you take seriously the recommendations that are outlined there and find better ways to ensure that you can even go beyond that. But before I get into some of that work, I just want to be able to touch on how upsetting this is and how rightfully upsetting it is to Canadians. You can just imagine that those persons, single mom, persons who are having a hard time trying to get into work, people who are struggling to make ends meet, they find out that in the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing right now, that the federal government has opened the doors to rich consultants to get even richer. We've seen in the audit, for example, some very serious issues of overbilling, that there's immense issues of vulnerability in the contracting processes. Some of these, for example, the report estimated 59.5 million was handed over to these wealthy consultants, like GC Strategies, the one we're auditing today. But this is a story that began in 2020, and there's contracts even between that period of time, to which I believe you were at CBSA when the $20 million contract that was a competitive one was tenured. To that extent, if that's not the case, I acknowledge that, but I think there's several instances and several issues. One on that contract alone, the contract that allowed rich consultants to define their competition directly from the person issuing the bid. Huge issue. I'll be touching on that in my subsequent rounds. The first issue I want to deal with, however, is the non-competitive processes that CBSA undertook in order to get the original contracts. 3 of them, I believe. These contracts that were not properly disclosed, even to the Auditor General, I understand that much of this information is still unknown. That's part and core to why we're asking these important questions. And so my concern for this questioning round is on those first set of contracts and the really ill proceedings that led to GC Strategies getting these contracts. We've seen in the audit, for example, that they were invited to dinners. They were given gifts, that some of these issues of direct conflict were not reported to CBSA. That it should be something that we all pause with and know that right now that level of transparency isn't present to this committee, which is deeply concerning, to not know exactly how these non-competitive contracts were able to be entered into. What do you know about the events and the gifts received by these 2 men in order to do services and to get access to a non-competitive process?
Okay, so I'll say a few things. It is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. And the systems, I would argue, in the absence of controls, allowed for the vulnerabilities that you referred to exist. The procurement ombuds, when he was testifying at another committee, indicated that in an emergency, it might be good practice to go to a consultant or contractor that you know, but that you would document that, and that the lack of documentation is what's giving rise to all of these questions that we can't answer. So absolutely, I would agree. And then the subsequent sole source contracts just elevate those questions even more. And so to me, there could have been a justification at the outset, had to move quickly. This was a company we may have been working with. They supplied people who could do the ones and zeros that worked with our people and deliver something.
How long
None of that is written down.
How long do you know in your investigations and your understanding that these gentlemen at GC Strategies have been involved with CBSA?
So my understanding, based on the documents I've seen, the GC Strategies worked as a subcontract to another firm prior to the pandemic. I don't believe there was a specific contract with GC Strategies, but I might be mistaken on that, and I can come back in writing to clarify. But before the pandemic, they were a subcontract to another company, and the individuals that were working with CBSA staff on a mobile application were the same individuals that came in to work with CBSA staff on ArriveCan.
And so, let me try to understand what you just said. They were a subcontractor before the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the practice of knowing somebody to do quick work, you're saying that they had access because those civil servants knew and were aware of GC Strategies. Is that correct?
Yes, it was in the same group, had those people under contract as became responsible for the ArriveCan app.
And how long did these civil servants declare they known these persons for? Do you know that?
I don't know that.
Interesting.
I don't know that.
How much time do I have, Chair?
You're out of time, I'm afraid, but we'll come back to you, Mr.
thank you.
Desjardins. Next, we have Mr. Brock. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. O'Gorman, although you have not been sworn or affirmed to tell the truth, there is a presumption that any witness who appears at committee will tell the truth. And I'll state at the outset that I have heard your evidence on multiple occasions, and you, ma'am, have a serious deficit when it comes to credibility and integrity.
Point of order. Chair.
Now, nothing he has said is out of bounds. You know I watch for language, and the member is pressing hard, as he has the right to do. You might not like it, but this is these serious allegations, and we're not hearing a lot of answers today from CBSA. It seems that no one was in charge. So, Mr. Brock, you have the floor. I stopped the clock. I'll resume it right now.
Ms. O'Gorman, in relation to a question put to you by my Liberal colleague, you said, who picked GC Strategies is still an unknown entity for well over a year. It's just hanging in the air. I guess you forgot about ATIP request number A-2022-27196, which asked for summary request records from November 1st to November 16th of notes, emails, and texts sent or received by Aaron O'Gorman, Ted Gallivan, Jonathan Moore, and Kelly Belanger related to either the ArriveCan app or their November 14th, 2022 appearance at Government Operations Committee, including any discussions following the meeting. Based on that response, you as President and Vice Presidents Min Doan and Kelly Belanger approved a briefing preparatory package that provides, wait for it, a direct response to the question, who chose GC Strategies for ArriveCan? And lo and behold, on Annex A of the ATIP, as supplied by someone in your department, presumably you, who made the decision to contract GC Strategies? My office made the decision to pursue the contract with GC Strategies. The two proposals for the work were presented to the CIO and President, and the decision was made to proceed with GC Strategies as their proposal and approach aligned with what the CBSA was looking for, particularly rapid staff augmentation. The Deloitte proposal was a managed service using their cloud instance. This would have involved additional risk and did not align with our direction to build cloud mob competencies within the agency. Why are you lying to committee?
Just 1 second. Mr. Brock, you were very good there. You and others know I do not condone that language, nor do we condone that in the House. I would ask all members to direct tough questions at the witnesses and to use parliamentary language, even though that not every person at this table is a parliamentarian. Ms. Gorman, you have the floor, and I apologize for that. Over to you, please.
Thank you, because I would like to confirm the allegations are not against me. This is not the first time that I have been accused of that. I have told the truth, and I continue to tell the truth. And so I'm not sure what document you're referencing. I don't know that it was approved by me. And the reference to my office, I wasn't in the position when GC Strategies was...
The former president, Mr. John Osowski. You can't escape liability and responsibility, ma'am. This is a document that was supplied by the CBSA in relation to an ATIP. Did you or anyone in your office share the results with the Auditor General as to who picked GC Strategies?
So I would have to look at that document to understand what it is in reference to.
Perhaps you lost this document as well, just like the rest of the documents.
We released it under ATIP, and I don't know who the "my" is that you're referencing there. I
Okay, I'm
wasn't
gonna
at
move on, ma'am.
CBSA when the decision was taken about GC Strategies.
I'm going to move on
and
because
we-
the record is clear, the documentation is clear, so let's end this charade as to who picked GC Strategies. It was John Osowski in the role of the former president and Min Doan. It had nothing to do with Mr. McDonald or Mr. Utano. I know you'd like to blame them because they cast blame on you and were pointing fingers. But this net of suspicion is
order.
much larger than the two individuals.
Mr. Brock, just 1 sec, please. Yes.
Yeah,
Ms.
Chair, this is not a court of law. This is not, we are
point
not
of order.
investigating
Ms. Shannon,
individuals.
this is a
Interrupt
parliamentary committee. Mr. Brock's questions are direct, but certainly within the bounds of acceptable questions. I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Brock. I'm starting the clock again. You have about 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Your reports to the RCMP about potential criminality only relates to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano. Is that correct?
That's not correct, and it is not correct
Who
to
else?
say...
Who else, ma'am?
Mr.
Who
Chair,
else?
may
This is
I
my
make-
time, Ms. O'Gorman. This is my time. Who else did you identify to the RCMP besides McDonald and Utano?
Chair, point of order. Does that not compromise RCMP investigations?
No, it does not.
No, I don't think Ms. O'Gorman is here to answer questions, and she will do so.
This is out of bounds.
It is not out of bounds. These are committee questions, and we have great latitude to ask questions on Parliament Hill, and witnesses will answer the questions to the best of their ability. Ms. O'Gorman, you have the floor, please.
blame anything on me, and
Lying, ma'am.
he did
That
not
committee.
say that.
Yes, he
That
did.
is not true.
He did.
The question was put to him whether a series of individuals he felt were being honest. And to my name, he said, I wouldn't think so. I don't know what he was referring to. He provided no more
Okay,
information.
so now can you
He
answer
did
my
not
question?
say that.
Who else did you identify?
So I did not identify
Ma'am?
anybody to the RCMP. The CBSA received allegations from Bottler that were serious enough
You told
for
me earlier at committee
to
that you
launch-
referred the matter to the RCMP.
I'm answering the question.
You
I'm
told
answering
me
your
earlier
question.
at committee, man, this is my time. You told committee earlier that you referred the matter to the RCMP. Did you simply furnish the Bottler allegation to the RCMP, or did you ask the RCMP to investigate Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano
Thank you,
at the
Mr. Brock.
exclusion of anybody
We will hear
else?
from Mrs. O'Gorman, please. You have the floor for a brief answer.
So I launched an internal investigation, and the investigators provided that information to the RCMP.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate the Auditor General and her team and this very challenging report. It's a challenging report for two reasons. One, because of its findings, and one, that it actually raises more questions than it answers due to the incomplete and unclear records and processes that were being practiced at the time. So I'm particularly glad that the CBSA is here to hopefully provide some answers. So just to start with, I just wondered, Ms. O'Gorman, if you could tell us why the CBSA disregarded Public Services and Procurement Canada's recommendations about the use of competitive contracts.
I can tell you that under my leadership, CBSA will not disregard PSPC's advice and concerns. Why that may have happened, I don't know.
Also, I wonder if you have any insight as to why CBSA awarded a non-competitive professional services contract to 49 Solutions after the firm sent in an unsolicited proposal. Why would that proposal be accepted?
So again, that's part of what we're looking at. I will say, I know that from my previous job at the Treasury Board Secretariat, at the beginning of the pandemic, industry provided many departments with unsolicited proposals in an effort to be helpful. Perhaps some of those were for personal gain. I think a lot of them were for public service. The contract you cite, I don't know if that was an effort to be helpful and it was in response to something that the CBSA needed at the time, or if it was something different.
Getting back to the use of a non-competitive process, I expect, or we've heard that it was, this is time sensitive, we have to get moving on this. But then it took between 12 to 63 calendar days from the day Public Services and Procurement received the agency's request to the day the contract was rewarded. 63 calendar days would have allowed a competitive process. Do you have any inkling why it would take that long to award a contract?
No, and I think that question would be better posed to the Public Service and Procurement. But I think what's behind your question is, given that time, why wasn't a competitive process launched?
Right.
And I think that's a very good question as we look at the rationale for sole source contracts versus competitive.
Right. Okay, and I realize, and that's why it would be advantageous to have some of these other agencies that were willing to appear today be here so that we could ask the appropriate questions to the appropriate witnesses. So I apologize for that. Now, I don't think there's any question that the ArriveCan app was necessary at the time to expedite, handling and processing people's travel documents at a very unique time. However, it's still always very important to ensure that we get value for money spent for the taxpayers' dollars. And I think one of the items identified was, so clearly, Canada Border Services Agency didn't feel that they had the internal capability to develop this app, which is understandable. They're not app developers. But I'm just wondering why they continue to rely on external contract people that were very expensive once the app was developed, rather than turning it over and using internal resources. Do you have any insight as to why that's the case?
I'll say a couple of words, if I may, and then turn it over to the Chief Information Officer for CBSA. There's, I think, three types of resources. One, very specialized, that CBSA, frankly, doesn't need to hire permanently. Two, people that are very hard to recruit. And then three, people who are just in the habit of continuing to do work, and that CBSA at some point ought to have said, we need a plan to convert these functions into our staff, that we need them for long enough, that we need to do that. So there's a few different types of resources. I think what we found is there was an absence of a plan, of an off-ramp plan, but those resources continued to be used, and I'll turn it over to Daryl.
Been in the public service for 10 months, so I can't comment specifically about what happened before that. However, what appears to have happened is that contractors were contractors did come in, and they weren't necessarily used as effectively as they could be. Which what I mean is contractors can provide a very valuable service from a staff augmentation, but they also tend to be more effective when you cross-train your own staff, and then when the project's done, the contractors go away. What appears to have happened is that didn't happen. Secondly, and I think Catherine Llewellyn has previously testified before this committee or OGO, there's a massive shortage of tech talent in Canada. It is extremely hard to attract and retain, and that's both private industry and in government. And so we really do struggle. At one point, we had 200 and some open positions in CBC alone, and there's thousands across government for the new cutting-edge skill set. So it is very difficult to attract. And I think it's those combination of things.
Thank you.
Then
Mr.
honestly,
Leaming,
there's just
I'm going to pause you there. We're well over the time, but I'm sure we'll come back to you for additional answers shortly. Maintenant, c'est Madame Secrétaire de Gagné, vous avez parole pour seulement 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
2.5 minutes. I'd like to come back to my questions to Ms. O'Gorman. In the 19 months that you've been at the head of the organization, can you tell us concretely what you've done to clean up in the agency? I'd really, really like to hear from you on that. How many employees were disciplined? Give us some information, some data on which we can depend. Well, I'm not sure that we needed that cleanup.
The employees of CBSA are working every day at the front line. Votre question touche sur les questions de discipline.
Your questions deal with discipline, I think, and each year, we have approximately a dozen or so, 15 perhaps, inquiries that we pursue in our organization.
When they're founded, action can be taken including discipline, retraining.
Là, vous parlez d'harcèlement de manière générale, là.
Are you talking about harassment, one employee harassing another, but Mr. Sabourin described a problem of reprehensible acts, which looks like perhaps generalized corruption in the agency. So, no.
Misconduct
Oui, mais je parle pas d'harcèlement, moi, donc.
No.
I'm not talking about harassment particularly.
Investigations.
D'accord, mais là, on parle de, par exemple, de collusion.
Okay, collusion with businesses in the provision of contracts, for example. Or there are companies that forge signatures. There have been RCMP inquiries on that at different levels. Failure to follow procedures, that's first thing. Collusion with businesses. Exchanging gifts. There's a lot of people at the CBSA that are involved in that. Not only the 2 people who were suspended or fired, but you're telling me concretely that there's not really no problems at the agency.
That we have, in any given year, dozens of misconduct allegations that are investigated. Many of those are founded and discipline is taken. I would say I don't know that there are many employees implicated in receiving gifts from contractors. I don't believe that there are as many. I can't give you an exact number. And also, I would point to the Public Service Disclosure Protection Act for those people who fear reprisal and want to make an allegation. There is a separate body that people can go to that itself can investigate any department and to protect the people that go with the allegations.
Thank you very much. Now turning to Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to follow up on the nature of how these contracts were entered into. I think there's lessons learned there as to how not only CBSA falls victim, and in this case Canadians fall victim to such an atrocity, but how it happens throughout the decades. Canadians know that this happens. They know that it's happened through Phoenix Pay System. They know that these contracts can become huge, and they know that it hurts the public service at the end of the day. The information officer just made mention that talent, for example, for information systems technology in Canada is very hard to come by. It's very difficult, it's competitive, and you pay a lot of money for it. The civil service at some points, and we had testimony in this committee before, to the effect that when we had those skilled experts, we found that there was a reduction of them throughout a period of time. And that reduction has now largely fed them into the private system where they can now come back and say, you need us more than we need you. And then we see these really stiff penalties and stiff requirements to be forced to work with them. This dependency is the issue in my mind. This rot at the core of the system is that we've so dramatically underfunded our civil service that we are now forced into a dependency situation where we are now vulnerable to companies like GC Strategies that used an opportunity to take more and more and more, in addition to a massive failure of our public service to report and to be agile enough on making sure there was enough reporting to have made this picture that we're talking about today far clearer. That is the truth in my perspective, and that's one that we need to get to the bottom of, absent of an RCMP investigation, which I think is warranted and required in this work. We're here today to discuss the findings of this audit, which are largely the issues of the public service and not reporting it. So now back to how these contracts get signed. The 3 non-competitive contracts. The Auditor General has made mention that those contracts were entered into and likely, in my perspective, influenced by gifts, events, and dinners. Those events, gifts, and dinners were not reported to the CBSA. Is that correct? Maybe to the Auditor General.
So we didn't see any evidence that employees who were invited to events reported to their supervisor. It doesn't mean it didn't happen verbally, but there was no documented evidence, and I would have expected to see that so that a supervisor could have put in mitigating measures if needed to ensure that that there wasn't an appearance or a real conflict of interest in a procurement process.
And so that conflict now is very real.
Very briefly, Mr. Desjardins.
Okay, sure.
Very briefly.
To the last contract now, the contract that was competitive. How is it that, given the criticism of those former contracts and that they received those contracts, how are they eligible for a contract, especially influencing that contract the way they did? We have evidence of that.
All I can say is I don't believe that evidence was available at the time the contract was competed.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Mr. Genuis, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Paragraph 1.56 of the report says, we found that GC Strategies was involved in the development of the requirements that the Canada Border Services Agency ultimately included in the request for proposal. So that means that GC Strategies sat down with people in the government, worked out aspects of the nature of the requirements which GC Strategies bid on and then got. That means the process was rigged. So, Ms. O'Gorman, can you tell us why the process was rigged in favor of GC Strategies?
So I wasn't there at the time. I think what you set out is what the evidence is demonstrating. And in terms of the motivation, I don't have enough information to speak to that.
Okay, so you agree the process was rigged, but you don't know why it was rigged. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm telling you that the collaboration that you're referring to appears to have taken place and is absolutely inappropriate.
Would you describe that as rigging the process, though? I mean, it pretty clearly is, but I just want to hear it from you. Would you describe that as rigging the process?
So the fact that there was one bidder and that bidder collaborated, I would agree that the odds were stacked in their favor. That being said, I don't have any information as to the motivation for that. So I can't speak to it, and I wasn't at the agency when that happened.
When did you first find out about that?
I believe it was in the information that was part of the investigation, but I can't tell you exactly when I found out about that.
We'll circle back to that. Paragraph 1.42 highlights inappropriate invitations and gifts from vendors. Did you ever receive or were you offered invitations or gifts from ArriveCan vendors?
No. Was
the former president?
I don't know.
Did you ask anyone if the former president had?
No.
Okay. Did Mr. Doan?
I don't know. I'm letting the
you ask?
investigation that's underway take its course. I am not stepping in front of it, and I'm not carrying out my own investigation. I'm relying on my security team and investigators to follow up on these issues.
So I want to follow up on the issue of the internal investigation report, and I think I know what is happening on the government end, in that the government has tried to invest a lot of focus on this internal investigation. But the internal investigation is not an independent process. We had the independent investigator here who confirmed as much. He confirmed that his role involves reporting to, being subject to, in a general sense for his employment, people who may themselves be the subject of suspicion. We've talked about rigged processes, and we've got a situation where the investigation into the rigged process also looks rigged, insofar as the investigator is not independent and is subject, in their position, to decisions of their superiors within the department. So how can Canadians have any faith in a rigged investigation into a rigged process, and why not have an external, truly independent investigator?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware that I am under investigation. The investigation is being carried out under my authority as a deputy head. And in order to carry out my authorities, I need an investigative arm. All large departments have an investigative team.
If in the process of these inquiries, you or your predecessor or others in senior positions around you were to be subject to suspicion, and we know there's suspicion insofar as people have come before this committee and said that you've been dishonest to this committee, surely an investigator who is subject to your authority would be constrained in fully pursuing those allegations. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chair, it's unclear why this is being made about me. I am not my predecessor. I am in this job now.
Well, Mr. McDonald told this
happened,
committee that you were not being honest and forthright.
So
you might disagree with that, but that is an allegation against you.
Just one second, Mr. Genuous.
Mr. Genuous forgets where.
No, I don't think he does.
I think you forget where we are.
Government operations or something
yes. If you could be specific about committees, I believe those testimony was made in Ilgo. You have about 10 seconds for a brief question, and then we'll hear an answer from Ms. O'Gorman.
The report identifies that there were 10,000 Canadians falsely, inappropriately sent into quarantine by one out of the 177 versions of the app. What is the total number of people who were sent into quarantine by this app who shouldn't have been?
Thank you.
10,200 were given a false notification that they should have been quarantined when they weren't actually needed to be quarantined.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Chen, and I have a note here that you're splitting your time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you want me to notify it 3 minutes, or will you do the tee off?
I'll do the tee off.
Perfect. Just want to make sure. Thank you. Over to you. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Gorman rightfully stated today that CBSA personnel work very hard on the front lines. We know them when we cross the borders. We know that they do everything they can to keep Canadians safe, to protect this country. And today, we are talking about an issue that is tarnishing each and every one of those workers, that is tarnishing the department, that is disappointing Canadians, because seeing this report from the Auditor General, I personally am utterly disappointed. It is mind-blowing what has happened here. At a time, especially when Canadians are grappling with the high cost of living, we are facing unprecedented inflation, the AG has found, quote, a glaring disregard for basic management and contracting practices with respect to ArriveCan, this $59.5 million project that even the AG has indicated she is unclear about whether that is the true and accurate number. Ms. O'Gorman, things have been said today about your role. You have indicated that you were not your predecessor. What would you like to say to this committee, to the Canadians that are watching, in terms of what next steps you're going to take to make sure that there is accountability, that this will be properly investigated, that we will have answers to the questions that have been put forward today? What do you plan to do next?
Thank you. I share your disappointment. I share your disappointment because from my previous position, I saw the people of CBSA working very hard to try and make the border work during the pandemic and allow commercial goods to come in and manage the border in a way that avoided it being clogged up and an impact on the economy. That being said, as I said, I share your disappointment that there is such a lack of documentation. If that documentation extended 6 months after the beginning of the pandemic, I would feel much more comfortable being here to defend that and explain that. But what didn't happen was a recognition that this is going to go on for more than 6 months. We need to stop, we need to regroup, we need to set a budget, we need to understand how we're going to keep going at this pace. And the pace was significant. The public health measures were changing on a fairly regular basis. That had to be coded in, that had to be released, officers had to be trained, a lot of things had to happen. So, as we've said, the lack of documentation is difficult to understand as it extends over that amount of time. I have a management response plan that I have developed with the team in response to both the Auditor General's audit and the procurement ombuds. I have an audit underway. We have made some significant changes. The fact that we are approving contracts at a committee is probably a belt and suspenders. It shouldn't be that a committee is required to oversee decisions that are in people's proper authority. We're going to keep that in place until we have some comfort that the controls are in place, that people understand their roles and responsibilities. As the Auditor General pointed out, I think yesterday, a lot of the recommendations are variations of following the rules. And I will agree with her that the department can do better than that.
Thank you. To the Auditor General, we have heard that there was a challenge in the department. They were facing an unprecedented situation. Canadians know that we had a COVID-19 emergency. In your performance audit, to what extent did you determine that the emergency that we faced as a country justified the shortcomings?
Well, and I've made it in my remarks in my opening statement, and I still stand by them, that an emergency was not a reason to avoid the most basic processes that should have been there to demonstrate due diligence and accountability to Canadians. I do recognize that it was a difficult time, but we have looked at other contracts and other procurements throughout the pandemic. And while there were definitely rules that were relaxed and all the hoops weren't jumped through, there was time taken to at least document key important decisions and be able to still be accountable to Canadians. And that's all I would have expected to see here from the processes around ArriveCan.
So we still need answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm afraid you've left 15 seconds for your partner. So you can ask a lightning question if you like.
I just wanted to say thank you to the Auditor General for your tremendous work, to you and your team for shining a light on the serious breach of controls and breach of code of conduct. So thank you very much for your tremendous work here.
Thank you. Turn now to Mr. Barrett. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Ms. O'Gorman, my questions are for you because the Auditor General has said that your department is responsible for ArriveCan. Canadians need to be able to have confidence in their public institutions. The work that CBSA does is incredibly important. Border service officers are the frontline defense for our country for so many different threats, and the importance of their work it can't be overstated. So the questions to the head of the CBSA are important so that we can have an understanding of if our confidence as Canadians is well placed, because we've seen and you've said that much of what's happened was not under your leadership, but an evaluation of what's gone on and what is going on at the CBSA is important. When did you find out the total amount of the contracted work that was given to GC Strategies by CBSA for ArriveCan? When did you find out?
So I don't have a date for that. Last fall, as we were gathering information in response to various questions and in response to my questions to understand when it was clear that there was an accountability that had to be given for ArriveCan. I don't have a date that I received that information.
So this week, the Auditor General has reported a number in excess of $19 million to GC Strategies. When you've appeared at committee, the other number offered by parliamentarians in questioning to you was about $11 million. But CBSA never corrected parliamentarians or offered that that number was incorrect in verbal or written submissions. Why is it that the number that the Auditor General is offering this week in excess of $19 million is not the number that CBSA officials, including yourself, gave to committee in their testimony at numerous appearances across numerous committees?
So the information on the costs for ArriveCan that included contracting costs were built with the information that we had at the time, and they related to the health measures of the ArriveCan app and more broadly supporting material, funding to SSC and so on. The Auditor General has looked at the app, including after the health measures were removed from the app and it was used for the advanced declaration function. So our scope and our timelines are different. I provided the best information that I had at the time. Our contracts are also published proactively, so there was no attempt to obscure GC Strategies contracts.
Well, I think that the problem that we have here is that the work that GC Strategies has done has only really been brought to light through the work of the Auditor General. That work includes writing the contracts, contract requirements to the exclusion of other bidders. That's some of the work that they've done. And when they write a contract, who gets awarded the contract? Well, they do. And so there has been obscurity on the part of the CBSA on how the contracting processes work and the amounts that have been given. The amounts have been revised up several times through reporting by the procurement office, by the procurement ombudsman, by the Auditor General, by the work of parliamentary committees, ATIPs. This information is not coming proactively from the CBSA every step of the way. We're pulling this out, and it seems like daylight is the last thing that the CBSA wants to shed on this. The subject of the failure to report gifts received by contractors or prospective contractors has also come to light. Have you ever been offered any gift or benefit by GC Strategies or people involved with GC Strategies personally?
No.
When did you learn about the gifts that were offered to people who work for CBSA? When did you learn about this issue?
Is it reference to the hospitality that was offered?
Yeah, the booze, the free drinks and dinners that were offered by the two guys that work out of a basement and were made multimillionaires on the backs of people who are lined up at food banks across the country in exchange for doing no work at all.
Please, Ms.
I don't have a date when I was made aware of that, but as you know, it was part of the internal investigation. It came to light as a result of the internal investigation.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kelly, you have the floor now for 5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to the witnesses for being here today. At the outset, I will say that earlier today at the Ethics Committee, members from the Conservative Party were able to ask questions of PSPC officials on this very topic rather than the topic that is being studied at ArriveCan. And we here in public accounts are being denied that privilege to be able to have both of these officials together to ask these questions. Ms. O'Gorman, perhaps I'll start with you. Did you receive a briefing on the ArriveCan file from the former president at the time that you transitioned over?
No.
And so how did you, other than the ArriveCan, how did you transition into your role?
So I had a general briefing with the previous president, but I had briefings from the team that was supporting me when I got into the job.
Thank you. And Are you at all surprised by the findings in the AG's report of yesterday?
I am.
And I appreciate that the report only came out yesterday, but can you share any plans that the CBSA has to address these recommendations?
Sure. And when I say I'm surprised, I'm not surprised entirely at what the Auditor General found because I've been finding that. So as I understand how the department was working, the fact that there was a link from or a path from the IT group straight into procurement at PSPC, that's not a best practice. And so as I was understanding and looking at the information that was available and wasn't available, I saw that there were issues and I've taken action and I will continue to take action, and the Auditor General and Procurement Ombuds have put a finer point on that. So
thank you for that. And I will echo the concern of my colleagues and the disappointment, because it really does tarnish the very, very hard work that CBSA officers on the front lines put in and day out to keep us safe, to keep our country moving, to keep goods flowing through, and to providing that support to Canadians. And I think that there's a lot of work that CBSA needs to do to rebuild that public trust. So I'll ask you, Ms. O'Gorman, have you taken any steps now to try to start rebuilding that public trust?
absolutely. We will be transparent in the actions we're taking. We will report on what we're doing. We're committed to implementing all of this calendar year. And I would just note more broadly, and to the comments that were made, I do believe the actions of Border Service officers day in and day out are critical to maintaining that trust. And that's what they're doing.
Thank you, and I hope that that we can follow up as you build that plan to build that trust. I think it would be prudent for this committee to keep updated on that. Ms. Hogan, if I may turn to you, my colleague across the way, Mr. Brock, referred to an ATIP with respect to the former president and GC strategies. Are you aware of that document, and were you aware of that question that Mr. Brock had asked?
Yes, our team has seen that document, absolutely.
Can you describe it in the context of it? Because, I mean, we haven't seen that document ourselves.
So I have looked at it. It looks like a briefing note for a committee appearance. I'm not sure who the briefing note is. I don't know who the MI is in the statement. It appears to be someone who was going to come and testify at a committee, and I'm not aware if that appearance even occurred. I would have read the MI to be the directorate or the branch that was responsible for the implementation and development of ArriveCan. But again, that wasn't it was provided, I think, through information that a committee had. And when we started our audit, not only did we look at the records that the Canada Border Services Agency had, but we also went to parliamentary committees who had been studying this to get their information so that we could cross-reference and made sure we had a comprehensive list of documents.
Thank you. And to clarify, Ms. Hogan, do you believe that corruption is rampant in the CBSA, or is this a matter of a few bad apples, or is it just bad documentation during a difficult time? If you can provide that clarity.
I'll leave the decision as to whether an action was of a criminal nature to the authority on that, which is the RCMP.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Very much. Thank you very much. Maintenant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés encore. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Je dois dire que je commence.
Well, I'm being somewhat upset by what I'm hearing when the colleagues across the way are trying to minimize what is being exposed by the Auditor General's report as a couple of bad apples, or because of externalities, a hard time, pandemic, that people strayed off of the conduct path. Now, I know that the Auditor General says it's one of the worst reports that she's ever had to write. So to minimize the problem is It's not the right way to go. PSPC has already raised some of these. Oh no, not that. GC Strategies assisted in the drafting of one of the submissions, which cost us millions of dollars. That's collusion, no matter what you call it. And it's a huge, huge problem. Gifts being accepted, etc., without authorization or reporting. I've worked in consultancies before, and I've never in my life received a contract unless I fulfilled the terms of the tender bid. And there was more than one person involved. There was entire teams examining these submissions. And then we're looking at possible potential criminal acts here. It's not a couple of bad apples. It's a generalized attitude within the agency, which is living off the public purse. And to what point are the ministers involved? And if I would have heard this kind of story of that scope, I would have followed off weekly. I would have checked with the agency on a weekly basis. Are there consultancies going on with you?
And I have told him of my plans to fix it. So I make no assumptions about the degree to which he is not concerned about this. I think he's very concerned.
Est-ce qu'il a fait des suivis fréquents?
Has he done some follow-ups? No, I guess not, he didn't.
Minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to turn our attention to the report, section 1.51. Quote, we found that Public Service and Procurement Canada, as the government central purchasing and contracting authority, challenged the Canada Border Service Agency for proposing and using non-competitive processes for ArriveCan and recommended various alternatives. These alternatives included running a shorter competitive process, for example, 10 days, or incorporating shorter contract periods with a non-competitive approach. Continues onto section 1.52, despite alternative options proposed by Public Service and Procurement Canada, the statements from Canada Border Service Agency officials that other vendors were capable of doing the work, the agency continued to use non-competitive approach. This is troubling, I think, to me and many Canadians to know that there was, in fact, someone who raised a red flag, and that red flag was dismissed. This is another area of serious concern for Canadians, to know that when our checks and balances are, in fact, present, that there's an ability even for CBSA to have waived these requirements or waived these recommendations, or however that went down. It's inappropriate that the concern was raised and that officials decided it was bad advice, or however they argued those points. I would, to the Auditor General on this aspect of it, what evidence did you receive that gave you the impression that they did not take the advice of PC or the Procurement and Public Service and Procurement Canada?
I might ask Mr. Hanush to add in on that, but if I can, Mr. Chair, I would just like to clarify the source of the document from the previous question that I had. We received that document directly from Mr. McDonald during our audit, and not from information from the other committee. So I felt it was important to make sure that my testimony was accurate. So I think here what we looked at was that we expected to see someone making the decision and why you would go a certain direction or not, and the decision to use a non-competitive contract is an important one that should be well documented. And while there were officials at CBSA that told us there were other vendors who could potentially do this work, it was still sourced to GC Strategies, but that documentation is very, very thin. So I'm going to see if Mr. Hanush wants to add anything to it. It really was that this went forward because the contract
was there
is
any
there.
evidence to suggest that those vendors were the same vendors that dismissed it?
Mr. Digital, I will let if you could, you're at your time, but I will allow for a brief answer, please, from Mr. Hanush. Or
he had nothing further to answer.
Oh, I thought there was one other person.
No, he had nothing further to answer.
Me.
So we made the statement because the contract was awarded to DC Strategy. So
I misunderstood. but Mr. Dizzy, your time was out anyway. I was going to allow a response. And yes, yeah, no,
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate that. Mr. Brock, you now have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Back to you again, Ms. O'Gorman. You are aware that the agency is under investigation by the Information Commissioner currently? Is that a yes?
I don't know what you're referring to.
You would have received notification from the Information Commissioner that your agency is under investigation because of delayed requests in terms of complying with ATIP requests from Mr. McDonald. You acknowledge that now?
I didn't know that I wasn't aware of that, no.
Yes. That your agency is delaying the release and has delayed the release for several months without proper explanation, and that's why the Information Commissioner is investigating you. Now, going back to another issue, pursuant to an order paper question brought in the House by a colleague of mine, that between March of 2020 and September 2022, 8 executives at the Public Health Agency of Canada who worked on the ArriveCan app were bonused $340,000, while taxpayers...
Correction?
That's not really a point. I'm sorry. Is this a point of order?
Well, point of order, because the proper name of the app is ArriveCan.
It's not a point of order. Nice try.
No. Let's stay. Look, folks. Let's stay on track. It is my intention to get through another round. We'll go over a few minutes. But I'd like to stay on track to give members another full round. Mr. Brock, you have the floor. You have 4 minutes left, please.
8 executives at Public Health Agency received commissions of $340,000 with this app that has cost taxpayers in excess of $60 million. Your agency did not release any details to that order paper question as to how much bonuses were paid out to your executives. Do you have an answer as to why you didn't respond or which executives at the CBSA were bonused?
So the information in terms of bonuses and performance pay are posted on the website, and I will not give specific individuals remuneration information.
Why?
It's covered by the Privacy Act. That's their personal information.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Nader.
As the grand inquest of the nation, this committee is entitled to information to call for papers and documents, and Ms. O'Gorman is incumbent upon the penalty of contempt of Parliament to respond to the questions of this committee.
That actually is a valid point of order. So, yes, Ms. O'Gorman, I will just remind you that, in fact, the Parliament supersedes its request any privacy laws that you might feel you're subject to. If papers are asked or if information is requested, you should be aware of Parliament's right to ask for, request, and receive such documents. I'll turn things. You got 3 minutes. 3 minutes left.
So, Ms. O'Gorman, your agency, which is at the center of this scandal, which in my opinion has brought the entire public service under disrepute, how many executives and how much money were bonused during the rollout of this particular app?
I don't have that information with me.
But you'll provide that to us?
I take note of the request.
And the answer is probably yes, that some executives were bonused, received commission for their work?
So the number of people that received bonuses at CBSA during the pandemic is on that information.
So the answer is yes.
Online.
Executives receive bonuses, and you'll tell us exactly who and by how much.
I take note of the question.
Okay, thank you. Now, to Mr. Hanoush and Ms. Dupre, I understand that you interviewed Cameron McDonald as well as Antonio Utano, and they furnished you with the details regarding that ATIP. And to answer the question of Ms. Hogan as to who that person was who made that request, you knew, as supplied by Mr. Utano and Mr. McDonald, that that person was Mindone. Did you share the details of the identity of that person to Ms. Hogan?
So yes, we did meet with Mr. McDonald, and we did take in consideration the materials that were provided to us as part of that conversation. And subsequently, as Ms. Hogan has indicated, We did discuss that specific document that you referenced earlier in the meeting.
Right. Did you specifically inform Ms. Hogan that the person who was identified as I take responsibility or my office was Min Doan? Yes or no, sir?
So Sammy and I talked about this, and we wondered whether it was Ms. Belanger or whether it was Mr. Doan, and it was unclear.
Did you seek clarification from the
information.
CBSA?
I'll have to ask Sammy if he sought clarity. I don't.
We did not, no.
Thank you. Cede to Mr. McCauley.
You got 50 seconds.
Just very quickly, I want to read a line from the Information Commissioner regarding the ATIP. It says, CBSA improperly responded that it did not have records responsive to the above noted access request. Now, you're aware of the concerns expressed that Mr. Doan has deleted emails. I'm just curious, how does your department respond with all this going on, deleted emails and investigation, and your department improperly responded that it did not have records responsive to an ATIP, specifically on ArriveCan?
So I'm not aware of who makes the ATIP requests, so if I look confused, it's
But your
because...
department improperly...
Mr. McCauley, you have the floor, please.
So I will look into that investigation. I don't have any information on it now. We take our ATIP responsibilities extremely seriously. We have a very high volume. I will look into that, into those concerns.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Like many of my colleagues here on this committee, I'm surprised and disappointed at the lack of accountability and missing information. But I would like to clarify that no one here is minimizing anything contained in this report. So I'd like to ask you, why was the CBSA own procurement directorate not involved in the contracting process?
So there seemed to be an ability of the individuals in certain, maybe all, in certain areas of the IT group to deal directly with PSPC on contracts. So that's not a best practice. So I have established and elevated the role of the procurement directorate to play its proper function in accordance with policy, which is to receive requirements from the various business owners across the department, develop procurement plans to the extent that procurement can take place within CBSA's authority to take the lead on that, or to interface with PSPC. So that wasn't happening. That is now the requirement, and we have a bolstered and more senior level responsible for procurement in the department.
Why did CBSA continue to award contracts after PSPC and CBSA officials provided alternative options?
Well, as I've indicated, under my leadership, we will work with PSPC. We will not discount their feedback. We will take their concerns extremely seriously, and we will work collaboratively with them.
Isn't there always a process or a requirement for people to disclose relationships with contractors?
It's absolutely part of our code of conduct, and the fact that in response to the audit and the procurement ombuds report, we are putting in place a requirement that that be disclosed suggests that people right now don't understand their obligations. So I would like to think that everybody understood the code and carried out the requirements of the code. I see this as looks like it's not the case, and so we are going a step further and requiring people to make those disclosures so there's no ambiguity when questions arise.
What are the consequences for those who don't disclose these relationships?
Well, so it's a new process, but it's inconsistent with the code, and we have the ability to issue discipline if we understand what the underlying issue is. So founded issues might be somebody needs training, or it might be that somebody understood their obligations and disregarded them, and in which case discipline is available to us.
Can you tell us about the new assurance reviews that CBSA will begin conducting annually?
Well, it speaks to the absence of controls. And so as the deputy head, I'm not going to look at every document that comes through, but I need an ability to have some assurance that the files are complete and that people are following their roles and responsibilities. So this is a fairly standard process in the public service. There's policies and guidance related to that, and I'm making sure that our assurance function meets all of those obligations and more, and provides regular updates on the extent to which some of the gaps that existed have been closed.
Okay. Who is going to make up the new contract review board?
So that's chaired by my executive vice president, and is comprised of our executive team as well as members of the procurement team. So it's quite a large body, and it meets on a regular basis in order to keep the business running, but make sure that the challenge function takes place across the board.
How long will the members serve on the board?
As long as they're in their positions.
And what tools will they have if there's wrongdoing or that happens?
So if there's wrongdoing, there's actually quite a well-established mechanism within CBSA for addressing misconduct, and it's similar to that of other large organizations. So I'm not concerned that the committee and that the chair won't be able to address wrongdoing, but it was more the challenge function and the broader accountability for procurement that was missing in the agency.
Thank you very much. Now, this will be our last full round. Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses for being here today. I'm first going to go back to the report to section 1.41. Auditor General, in this section it says, we've reviewed available records and could not determine which agency official made the final decision to select GC strategies. However, as my colleagues indicated here today, there is documentation that was provided that showed that the previous CBSA head, in coordination with the CIO, did come to this decision. I'm wondering why you did not come to this decision, given this piece of documentation, and why you think this is, if you believe that this piece of documentation was not provided for you, if you were not able to discern who came to this final decision based upon this piece of documentation. Why were you not able to determine who made the final decision to select GC strategies, given this documentation my team has presented here today?
So the source of the documentation is one of our concerns. It wasn't maintained in official corporate records. And I would expect that it would be there. It is very unclear who the individual is speaking to, and I've heard no testimony. It appears to be a briefing note for a committee appearance, and I've heard no testimony around it. It remains that the decision on who decided to award a certain contract needs to be properly documented, and what we do have on file is that a contract requisition was signed by the executive director, and exercising delegated authority in the public service comes with responsibility and accountability.
Who? Ms. O'Gorman, we've also discussed today about the missing documentation of Mr. Min Doan. Now, the Auditor General, in her testimony yesterday, said that she can't determine. It could have either been deleted or destroyed. Again, for this committee and for Canadians, can you please verify the information that you have relative to this documentation of the former CIO specifically, please?
So we have received allegations that emails were deleted. Those allegations were provided to our Director of Security, and there is an investigation into those allegations.
And you can't provide anything further at this time other than these allegations?
That they're being investigated.
They're being investigated. And who are they being investigated by, please?
by members of our security team under the direction of Monsieur Lafleur.
Okay, and will you be receiving any update on these investigations prior to the final release of the report?
I don't know if there's material information that I should be made aware of. I'm confident that they will provide it to me as they have in other investigations.
And when is this report expected to be finished?
Well, as I said, if there is information, I'm confident they'll give it to me. I don't know when, and I don't know if there will be information before the final report. It's underway. I don't always receive information before a final report. Sometimes I do. Not
and
always
sometimes,
the case.
apparently, you don't. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. O'Gorman, again, this committee, this parliament right now, Canadians are absolutely seized with this ArriveCan app, the ArriveScan app, because we have a minimum of $60 million, which has been spent, but as a result of incomplete documentation, it could be more than 60 million. 18% of invoices submitted by contractors which did not have supporting documentation, $12.2 million, which could be unrelated to ArriveCan, as uncovered by the Auditor General who is here today. You yourself in this meeting alone were unaware of contempt of the information officer. You were unaware of bonuses awarded to 2 employees who have now been suspended, the most grave action in the public service. You didn't inform the AG of the RCMP investigation. You didn't inform Government Operations Committee in November of 2022 of the RCMP investigation of GC strategies. CBSA has 14,000 employees. Do you believe that you still have their confidence today, before us here today?
Once again, Chair, I'm not sure why the need to impugn my integrity. I will correct.
Do you think they have your confidence?
I'm going to correct something that was said.
I'm asking you. Do you think that they have you have the confidence of them here today?
Mr. Chair, may I correct one of the statements?
Your time
And
is
I'll end
almost
with,
up.
do you believe you still have the confidence
We will
of
look
the
for an
minister
answer,
and of
Ms.
this government? Thank you very much,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
You have the floor, Ms. O'Gorman.
So it's false to say that I didn't inform the Government Operations Committee of the RCMP investigation. When I appeared, nothing had been referred to the RCMP.
Ms. Kuzi.
That's not correct. I appeared on November 14th, and the referral to the RCMP was formally done in January, was informally done in December and late November. I wasn't aware that we hadn't referred anything to the RCMP when I appeared, so that's not correct to say that. And I know the committee had tried to hold me in contempt for that. It's incorrect that I did not give the committee relevant information. Nothing had been referred to anybody at that point.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Khalid. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And while because I have expressed my own disappointment in what has happened with this app, I think it's improper for members to put words in my mouth to say that I am negating or somehow belittling the situation. All in all, I'm asking reasonable questions and looking for reasonable solutions going forward. I'm sorry if I haven't feigned outrage as some of my colleagues have. I do respect the witnesses that are present with us today, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to work together to find those solutions to rebuild that trust and to ensure that we find out, get to the bottom of what happened here and where do we go going forward. Now, to the Auditor General, Ms. Hogan, as you were going through the report, through the audit process, did you find that all departments were cooperative with you? Did they give you all the information that you were looking for? Were they open and forthcoming?
Yes, we received all the information we requested. At times it was rather voluminous, and the turnaround time was very quick.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it is disappointing that there was lack of documentation for you to review to come to a better conclusion, and we recognize that. And as Ms. O'Gorman has said, these are issues that I am sure that the CBSA will take seriously in rectifying going forward. Now, Ms. O'Gorman, there have been questions back and forth to you about discrepancies in your testimony at a different committee at OGO. Can you please clarify why there is that discrepancy, or if there is one?
I have testified truthfully with the information that I have every time I've appeared at committee. So it's unclear to me why there are questions with regard to my truthfulness or any discrepancies. So I'm happy to address them. They're being referred to in general ways, and it's very hard to address them without precision.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I would hate for you to be pushed off of a glass cliff. We always look for strong leadership in these types of positions, and I hope that you are able to take that leadership and rectify these challenges. Now, there were some questions that were raised with respect to executive bonuses. So to the Auditor General, you did speak about the executive bonuses, and obviously Canadians are rightly concerned about how our taxpayer dollars are used, and I would guess that they would not agree with providing executive bonuses to anyone who's been found guilty of wrongdoing. Now, if the investigation does uncover wrongdoing on any part of the executives of the CBSA, my apologies, it's to Ms. O'Gorman, is there a process that you would reclaim those bonuses, or how would you fix that situation?
Exactly as you said, there is a process. If information comes to light that would call into question the bonus or the assessment, frankly, the assessment of the individual, which itself would be tied to their remuneration, there is a clear policy by the Treasury Board to be able to claw that back.
Thank you very much. And I'll use the remainder of my time, Chair, if I may, to ask the clerk with respect to when the officials that were cancelled at short notice today, when they will be reinvited back to this committee, so that we can ask our questions of them as well.
That has not been determined yet, Ms. Khalid. You still have 50 seconds.
Well, when will that be determined, Chair?
I'm going to see what their availability.
And I'm hopeful that we will discuss that with the other members of the committee before we decide when to invite them.
You're hopeful? I've noted.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Encore une fois, Madame Secrétaire d'État, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Compared to other countries that have a similar application, in France, with a population that is double that of Canada, they paid $9 million to create this type of app. In Germany, $29 million for 40 million people here in Canada, of course, if we compare that. Since you've been CEO of the organization between July 22, when you were in position, and March 2023, where the overview by the OAG was done, $12 million have been expended. That's more than the total cost of a similar application for a population of 70,000 million. What do you think of those costs? Why were you not able to internalize that and save money to the taxpayer?
Is looking to what our allies are doing and trying to take from them any innovations, but I don't think comparing the population is necessarily accurate in terms of I'm not aware of what their requirements are versus the requirements that we had. So
c'était les mêmes, c'était les preuves vaccinales, c'était l'entrée-sortie, puis la.
Well, checking for vaccination certificates, entry and exit from the country. How many people are using potentially use the application? So one has to see what the volume of that use is.
Comment on the details of their work versus ours. I will say that for the part of ArriveCan that we are currently using, the submission of the advanced declaration, going forward, that the budget for that, or the estimated cost, is approximately $3 million per year, and I can hand it over to my colleague to provide those details.
Yeah, like as President Gorman said, population isn't the biggest driver of the cost of developing an app. You know, unfortunately, CBSA has a tremendous amount of technical debt, and the capability and cost to link a modern application to it is very expensive, and that was a primary driver for it. Additionally, because our provinces are so separate and each had its own vaccination certificates, that drove up the cost significantly as well.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup. Suivant, Mr. Desjardins, you have minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to, again, return to the report. The reason I think all of us are here. On page 7, Exhibit 1.2, the Canadian Border Service Agency continued to rely heavily on external resources to develop ArriveCan from April 2020 to March 2023. It cites, of course, the information related to both external and internal costs as it relates to this project in particular. It notes, at least in my reflection of this information, a very serious lack of internal capacity, IT capacity, that has put CBSA in a position where they must accept a contract. This is not new in the federal public service. We've witnessed these kinds of cuts, in my perspective, since the 90s. We've seen consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments cut down the public service. We see austerity, and when we have austerity to the public service, it's my firm belief that we are now vulnerable to these kinds of very real challenges present to a government. And I know it's not something that we can fix just like this with this report. It's a much deeper issue. I believe that the rot is very, very deep, that this level of reliance and dependency on external contractors has put the government in direct risk, not just in CBSA. I fear that this could exist in any instance of outsourcing across the government. My concern is, how do we properly address it with the resources, of course, that we have, and how do we ensure that issues like outsourcing are dealt with seriously, that the extreme deficit, operating deficit of the government is actually taken into account. I think this is a core part to this discussion that, absent of the RCMP investigation that I'm in support of, we need to focus on in this work. We need to focus on the fact that this dependency has left a critical vulnerability to the government, and it's been exploited both in the Phoenix pay system of the former government, and now we have another example of private entities taking direct and very purposeful intervention with the public service in order to award themselves contracts. That is what it looks like to me. GC Strategies was emailing CBSA officials, telling them what to put into a contract, and then telling them that they were going to get it. All they had to do was rubber stamp it. That is simply unacceptable, and I've heard today that's unacceptable for everyone here. So now I want to get to a deeper issue.
Very quick question.
To the Auditor General, how is it that we can find a path out of this direct reliance that you say is an over-reliance on outsourcing? And in your mind, is it a perceived risk to a future instance like this?
I think I would point to a few of the reports that we've issued on aging IT infrastructure, and I think it's taken the public service decades to get where it is, and that there needs to be a path to get forward, as you say. I think some of it is about ensuring that contracts related to IT have a clause and have requirements where there is transfer of knowledge and expertise, or skill set at least, to the public service. We need to upskill the public service in order to be able to rely less on external expertise going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. Ms. O'Gorman, as of today, February 13th, 2024, do you have trust in those to whom you have delegated authorities in your agency?
I'm in a trust but verify frame of mind. So I have, since I arrived, been putting in place some of that which was missing. And in fact, there were many excellent audit recommendations, not from the Auditor General, internally, that had not been implemented. 53 of those have been implemented. So there's catching up to do. I'm putting the pieces in place. I'm responding very specifically to the recommendations of the Auditor General and the procurement ombuds, and I suspect my own internal audit, will come with more recommendations. So we're not there yet. We've put some things in place, some belt and suspenders in certain cases that I hope one day will no longer be needed.
The lack of a clear yes is troubling. When did you receive the preliminary report from the Auditor General?
The preliminary report. I received the principal draft on August 3rd, and then I received the second DM draft in December.
Between December and now, has there been any disciplinary measures within your department related to the draft you've seen from the Auditor General?
And I'll just complete, and I also received a draft on the 18th. And your question is, have I undertaken any
disciplinary measures within your department or within your agency since you've seen the draft reports of the Auditor General's report?
No.
None, okay. Has any additional information been provided to the RCMP from your agency, from CBSA, since you've seen the draft reports from the Auditor General?
So I am not interfacing with the RCMP, and the people that are not reporting to me about their interface with the RCMP. If the RCMP wants information, and they may well have sought it, that is not being reported to me.
Have you met with the RCMP?
No.
Earlier this week, we received a letter from you dated February 7th, 2024. Are you aware of this letter? It's signed by you, referring to Deloitte being in the penalty box.
Signed by me?
Yes, you sent us a letter to this committee, signed by you.
Just 1 second, Mr. Nader, yes.
Yeah, is this a letter that's been provided to the committee? Yes. To the Public Accounts Committee?
Yes.
Yes, apparently has.
It's dated February 7th. We received it yesterday from our clerk. Are you aware of this letter in which you state the CBSA is unable to validate testimony provided to the Standing Committee on Government Operations that Deloitte was in the penalty box in the spring of 2020? Are you not aware of this letter?
Yeah, so we are unable to validate that. And
So
I think the person who is alleged to have said it, my predecessor, also addressed that at committee.
So you stand by that you're unable to validate that Deloitte was in, quote, the penalty box?
I've seen no evidence
of
that statement.
Okay, so
And I wasn't
you've seen no evidence because obviously emails are non-existent, documents are non-existent. But can you tell me with certainty that among senior executives at CBSA there wasn't an unwritten spoken word that Deloitte was in the penalty box?
So since I have been in this position, absolutely not. And I have seen no evidence that it existed before, and I would point to the testimony of the person alleged to have said it.
Whose emails are also deleted. Moving on, 1.74 of this document from the Auditor General expresses grave security concerns that the cybersecurity assessments were undertaken by people without a reliability security status. Can you confirm to me today that all contractors and subcontractors have the requisite security clearance across CBSA?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to address the reference to whose emails were also deleted. So I don't know that that's the case, and I don't know what that's in reference to. So I just don't want to let that hang out there. If there's more precision, but I'm not aware of more emails having been deleted. In terms of ArriveCan, the names that were on task authorizations for people who did work had the requisite security clearance. 4 names were found that were not on task authorizations where security clearance could not be confirmed.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I want to, again, my question was, can you confirm today that across the agency there are no contractors or subcontractors that are operating without the requisite security clearance? Can you confirm that?
So the information that I have is that they do have the requisite security clearance. So if there's something in particular that you're referring to?
I'm referring to across the agency. There is a appalling lack of documentation across your agency.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. That is your time. The question was answered. And turning now to Ms. Shanahan, you have the last 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to go back to the issue of the challenge function and exactly how that would work. Again, I'm very preoccupied by the fact, yes, that this happened, but also that there seemed the oversight, the normal checks and balances did not seem to be in place because we know human nature. People in any organization, you're going to have, yes, some bad apples, but we need to understand how does an organization protect its operations from that happening again. In the Auditor General's report, paragraph 1.48, it was found that the Canada Border Services Agency Information Science and Technology Branch would lead the development of the ArriveCan application directly engaged with PSPC for contracting purposes, and that there was no evidence that the agency's own procurement directorate was regularly involved in the contracting process. So I'd like to ask you, Ms. O'Gorman, have you investigated or confirmed or explored exactly what happened there? Was the procurement directorate completely bypassed in this process?
So my understanding is they received certain information, but that there was a direct path from individuals within the IT group to PSPC to discuss contracts. And so for whatever reason, the procurement function wasn't an intermediary to that. So,
and how would that pathway have been developed? And that's why I would have liked to have had those officials here from PSPC to be able to ask them that question, Chair. But from where you sit, how would that have been the case? If procurement directorate had some idea that something was going on, could they not have said, hey, wait a minute, something's going on here. This is not right. We haven't signed off. Could red flags have been raised?
Yes, they could have. And so the roles and responsibilities with regard to procurement are quite well established, including the business owner, those who might need a contracted resource, the contracting authority, who is the interface, PSPC for contracts over a certain amount of time. So what's in place now is the correct roles and responsibilities, where the people in IT would go through the CBSA's procurement function, and whether that's then onward to PSPC or for a contract within CBSA's authorities. But those have been established.
And are there measures in place that PSPC, for example, cannot accept anything from CBSA unless they're the proper sign-offs? So for some reason, they did accept procurement. They did accept those contracts.
And I don't know that I would put that at the feet of PSPC. Having not been there, I don't know if it was the exigent circumstances. So I can't speak to that, and I wouldn't put that at the feet of PSPC. Well, of course, Mr. Terry will, of course, speak to officials from that department. But my role is to make sure that the right people in CBSA are interfacing with PSPC, and that's what I've put in place.
Okay, and just back to for the procurement directorate itself, what oversight is in place there? Because I can understand if there's one place where, invoicing, incorrect invoicing, and typically, what do we see in any kind of big project? It's padding the invoices and so on. But here, we didn't even have details on the invoices to begin with.
Exactly. So
what oversight?
It's a procurement directorate's function to provide that oversight and to require and insist that the appropriate level of information is contained, be it in a task authorization or an invoice, from all the way to the coding for payment. So that is their function, is to carry out that oversight. And then the assurance function will make sure that it's being done regularly and properly and that the files are complete.
All right, and with the remainder of my time, is there anything else that you'd like to add to your testimony today, Ms. O'Gorman?
Only that I share the concerns. I do hope that it doesn't risk the trust of Canadians in the functioning of the CBSA and the critical work being done by employees, border service officers across the country and around the world. The work they do day in and day out is excellent, and it's important. We are fixing this. We are troubled by this, but I would hate for that to get extended to the people who are doing that and other critical information and other critical activities across the organization.
Thank you.
The
Thank you.
exchanges that occurred here today.
Thank you very, very much. I want to thank officials from CBSA for coming in today, as well as from the OAG. That concludes our meeting. We're back Thursday with the Environment Commissioner. And for now, I will bid you a good week. Thank you again. This meeting is adjourned.
All right, everybody, anyone that's new to the channel, please like and subscribe. At 6:30 p.m. Eastern Canada time, I will be broadcasting the Emergencies Act Committee. They're doing something about the judge's ruling anyway. It doesn't really explain much, but we will see what happens.